Morning Joe just gave us some of the worst political analysis of all time, talking about Joe Manchin. Take a look.
Willie, Joe Manchin is really interesting to me in all of this. He's right. There are other Democrats that have some concerns about raising taxes, but none of them are out front of the cameras taking the lead. Manchin is both reveling in his public role, but he also has some more freedom to do it because his state is so red. There is no Democratic base really in West Virginia that he has to worry about. Yes, there are a chunk of progressives in West Virginia. The Democrats that live in West Virginia tend to be very, very liberal, but there are so few of them. And he knows that he holds that seat because there are people, frankly, who voted for Donald Trump twice who are also voting for him. So he's able to take kind of this public lead out there. And you saw Jen Psaki, I think, trying to continue to try to walk this very careful line of knitting together those people that make the Democrats the majority with an increasingly powerful progressive left. And so far, they've managed to hold it together. But I think that's going to be the central tension, especially considering this decision from the parliamentarian that we're going to be covering from here on out.
Yeah, and Michael, still, let's look at the politics of this, because I know a lot of progressives get very upset with Joe Manchin every time a package comes out and he says, well, I don't like this part of it or I don't like that part of it. But let's just look at the politics so everybody can understand what's going on here. There are a lot of Democrats that may have concerns about a bill. Maybe they don't want the corporate rate to go up to 28. Maybe they only want it to go up to 25. But they don't want to get out front for a lot of political reasons. If you're Kyrsten Sinema, maybe you're balancing things. If you're Mark Warner, if you're former Governor Hickenlooper, you may not be as comfortable getting out and saying that, crossing the president, upsetting your base. So when Joe Manchin does that, coming from a state that Donald Trump won with 68% of the vote, it's good for everybody. It's good for Manchin in West Virginia to prove that prove his conservative bona fides and prove that, hey, listen, I can be a Democrat and still represent this very red state.
It's good for everybody for Joe Manchin to do this. That's what Joe Scarborough just, it's good for everybody that Manchin does. It's good. It's good. This is one of the worst shows on TV. I think that's pretty clear. It's good for everybody for Manchin to do this. Joe, nobody in the country, among actual voters and real people, is itching to keep that corporate tax rate low. In fact, there was a poll from, I think, a few years ago. 83% of the country wants to raise the corporate tax rate. 83%. This exact bill that's being proposed, 65% of the country supports it. But Morning Joe says it's, quote, good for everybody that Joe Manchin is doing this. It's good for nobody. It's good for nobody. You know who it's good for? It's only good for the corporations who are incredibly corrupt and have bought the politicians, and they're corrupt, and this is them doing their bidding. This isn't good for everybody. The corporate tax rate was 35% in 2016. Trump cut it all the way to 21%. Biden comes in and doesn't even say, let's go back to 35%. He says, we'll do 28. And now Manchin chips away and says 25. So, in other words, look at the game that's being played on you. That Overton window is shifting further and further right. It was 35%, and now with the reform that the Democrats want to be 25%, so it's still a cut of 10% from 2016. Listen, how many times do I have to describe this? How many times do I have to explain this to people? And these idiots don't get it because they're morons on Morning Joe. None of the West Virginia voters are like, gosh, I really wish the corporate tax rate was lower. God, I really wish Joe Manchin would split the difference between 21% and 28%. Nobody thinks that. No actual voter thinks that. The way in which West Virginia voters are more moderate is on social issues. Generally on social issues, they lean more pro-gun. They lean more anti-abortion. But on economic issues, they're not right-wing. They're not. And if anything, they're more populist. They're further to the left. They like stuff like a $15 an hour minimum wage, which, by the way, you need in order to survive and live in a one-bedroom apartment in West Virginia if you're working full-time. They like stuff like the $15 minimum wage. They like stuff Like the stimulus checks. CNN went and did, an interview with random people on the street in West Virginia, and all of them are like, I think it's great. I love these stimulus checks. They're wonderful. But there's this conventional wisdom in Washington, D.C., among the political class and among media elites. And the conventional wisdom is, these states want moderation and want more conservative Democrats, and that's interpreted as do more right-wing stuff economically. When again, the only people who agree with the right-wing economic stuff, it's the corporations. It's the corporations. Actual voters don't want corporations to get a tax cut. Don't want them to have this low rate. They just don't. They just don't. But see, they can't help but cover politics just in this like game sort of way. This behind the scenes, we're playing a game. It's a horse race kind of thing behind the scenes. And he says, it's good for everybody. It's good because Manchin gets to flex his conservative streak, and it's good because it gives cover to the other 6 or 7 Democrats who secretly agree with him. That's not good for them because the voters don't like it. I mean, it's not good for anybody, but it's definitely not good for them. They think it's some sort of political genius to disagree with Biden on this from his right. Kyrsten Sinema thought it was political genius to vote down the $15 minimum wage, and now she's phenomenally unpopular. 65% of Arizona voters, this poll just came out, said raise the minimum wage to 15. 61% of them said even if you have to get rid of the filibuster to do it, get rid of the filibuster. They're not actually representing anybody except the corporations. That's it. And Morning Joe is so stupid, they go out there and pretend like it's some sort of brilliant political move. It's not even close. This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. This is the worst political analysis I've ever seen.